This is Eric Rattan of Cannibal Corpse. You are listening to the Scars and Guitars podcast with Andrew McKay Smith.
Hey there, thanks so much for tuning into the show. I appreciate it because I've got a conversation that is in very rare company for me, I must say, because it's with Matt Johnson, who is the fella out the front of The, an iconic British outfit that's been around for well over 40 years. The catalyst for the conversation with Matt is due to the release of The Comeback Special. It's a live album, it's a film, and he's also got a book to accompany the film and the album. They were released on October 29, 2021, so of course they're out right now. This is a chat that comes along rarely for me, I must say. I think the last one like this featured Michael Girard from Swans, and incidentally, both bands' music resembles each other, it must be said, as does the fierce intellect of both Michael and Matt. In this conversation here, we certainly go there. You'll hear us talk about social and political issues, of course, the dominating issue of our times, COVID, but more specifically, the political response and how partisan this fucking issue really is. Outside of that, of course, we talk about the music and plenty of other topics, such as his interest in motorcars, something else that I've got, which I don't talk about too often, but yes, I do own a V8 and I love talking about cars and engines and all those sorts of things. But as I say, the opportunity rarely comes up. But Matt, being a fierce intellect, has multiple interests, so we're able to chat about all of these topics. For those of you tuning in and watching via YouTube, we're going to dive into the conversation right now. As for those tuned in via the podcast, we're going to have a listen to a tune taken from The Comeback Special. This one is called The Beaten Generation.
Upon the skylines of this once proud nation, can you sense the fear and the hatred growing in the hearts of its population? But now youth, oh youth, are being seduced by the greedy hands of politics. Half-truths, the beaten generation, reared on a diet of prejudice and misinformation. The beaten generation, open your eyes, open your imagination. We're being sedated by the gasoline fumes and hypnotized by the satellites into believing what is good and what is right. You may be worshipping the temples of mammon, or lost in the prisons of religion, but can you still walk back to happiness when there's nowhere left to run? The beaten generation, read on a diet of prejudice and misinformation. The beaten generation, open your eyes, open your imagination. liberty and keep us from peace. Then will the words sit ill upon their tongues when they tell us justice is being done? The freedom lives in the barrels of the warm gun. The beaten generation, the beaten generation, read on the diet of prejudice and misinformation. The beaten generation, the beaten generation. Open your eyes, open your imagination.
How's the course been going in preparation for these new releases?
Sorry, how's what?
How have the phone calls, the Zoomers?
Oh,
the
good.
yeah.
Yes, all good. Been doing a lot of interviews the last couple of months. All very, very good. These seem more effective. These Zoom ones, the old phone ones seem very. Some of the ones to America, you can't hear what people are saying half the time.
Do you think it's the accent or is it just the way people...
No. It's the technology. If they use regular, some of the phones that come through the I've got a bit of a cold, actually. You might hear in my voice. So
I can hear. Yeah. Well, that's a good sign from the perspective. At least things are opening up over there now after the COVID thing. I know it's still going.
They are. How about over there?
Gradually, although we've still got hard border closures. It's just bullshit, to be honest with you, what's going on. I get very frustrated with it because I know people that have lost businesses and losing their livelihood over it. And
yes. It's been
got
devastating.
Yeah, it has been, mate. And look, my perspective on things overall are that in countries like Australia and the UK, particularly with the you got NIS? Is that what it's called over there? National Insurance Scheme? Is it, or like our Medicare?
Yeah. It's like the NHS. Yeah, National Health Service. Yeah,
Gosh, it's been a long day, so apologies. But
don't worry.
Really, I think that we should have set things up for people who were at risk rather than locking down the entire economy the way that we've done, because it's going to take us bloody decades now potentially to get out of this. Now we've got the, excuse my language, mate, swear word warning, but the fucking Olympics coming up. Like we need them.
Yeah. It's insane. It's insane. But if you look at Australia and Austria, people are under house arrest. Then now the police are going around arresting people, demanding that they show their papers. And this is for, a virus that has, 99% survival rate. Nothing makes sense about the last 2 years. Nothing makes sense at all. There's so much contradiction. There's so much division. And it's getting worse and worse. It has opened up a bit over here, although on the continent, Austria, Germany, and now seem to be moving more towards some sort of totalitarian situation where they're harassing people in the street, demanding to see papers, and then putting them under house arrest. Very, very strange. The economies have been devastated. I know a lot of people, little pubs and restaurants over here that have just gone out of business. Very, very sad, very depressing. A lot of people's mental health has been affected. There's been suicides, depression. It's very, very strange what's going on, to say the least.
And it's so much of it is drawn along party lines in Australia, certainly. And I think it's the same in the UK. Our politics is virtually the same, as you're probably aware.
Yeah.
It's just been this hard left totalitarian mentality. Lock people down. You don't want anybody to die, do you? It's just been this constant line that we've been fed. Our state premiers here, so we're state based. Meaning, I'm in Queensland, and we've got a Labor government, and Victoria's got a Labor government as well. And of course, we've been locked down the longest and the hardest. And Victoria has had the hardest lockdowns in the world. The state of Victoria in Australia.
Yes. I've heard it's unbelievable. That's Dan Andrews, isn't it?
Yeah, and he's a fuckwit. God, he's a piece of shit. Excuse my language.
He looks like a psychopath.
He is. You're right. He is. He's just. Everybody thought Jeremy Corbyn was bad, mate. He's got nothing on Andrews. Nothing. I mean,
I mean, that then it's a completely different situation. Corbyn wasn't like that at all. He was quite a gentle person, anti-war and a bit more of a libertarian, but Dan Andrews seems psychotic. And who's the other guy?
That's
Gunner?
my point. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
Gunner.
yeah.
Well, you know all about it, Northern Territory. I mean, he's a...
Yes. Is that true? What's going there? I'm hearing all these horror stories in the Northern Territories.
He has said, if you are anti-lockdown, you are anti-vaccine, therefore you're an anti-vaxxer. I mean, the broad brushstrokes that they are doing at the moment and forcing people to take positions, as I say, it is along partisan lines, is just unconscionable. And I simply don't understand how we here in Australia have let it go, because I've got a podcast and I talk about it all the time like this. Like I feel like I'm doing my bit, and most of my audience is in the States. And I let people know, and I get heaps of communication via Messenger, Facebook Messenger, and the like, asking me what the hell is going on over there. I just send them the news reports that I feel comfortable sharing with them, and tell them what my own experiences are, which is that we're locked in to Queensland. We can't get out. If we get out, we can't get back in unless we pay for a 2-week hotel quarantine ourselves, which of course
these
costs
are
about
quarantine camps. The quarantine camps that they've set up as well, right?
Correct.
I'm hearing about. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
Unbelievable. Now, do you think these people are taking orders from somewhere else? Because a lot of countries are moving in lockstep over this throughout the start of the pandemic. The World Health Organization seems to be handing down directives. There are a few countries in Europe, Sweden notably, which has not locked down. My son is Swedish. I spend a lot of time in Sweden, and Sweden has been very different. They didn't do hard lockdowns. They're no worse off than anybody else. And compared to, somewhere like Belgium, which did very, very hard lockdowns, which has a higher rate of COVID. So nothing really makes sense in any of this. And it's causing people, there's a lot of anger, a lot of confusion. And the fear, the propaganda over here is the BBC, relentless 18 months of fear. And people are just terrified. You got people literally in cars by themselves, with the windows wound up, with masks on or two masks on. Terrified. Go to the countryside, you see someone by themselves, an old person going for a walk in a field by themselves, all masked up. It's what the fear has done. It's pure, it's like psychological terrorism, really. It's terrified so many people. They can't think straight. And so they're allowing these despots to get away with it.
I think, look, there's a couple of really good points in there. Like the first one would be, I think somebody must be pulling the strings from above. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'll say that many, many times. I don't buy into any of this Q bullshit or any of this other crap, but something is bloody going on. We know it. Look in the States. How can one of the most unpopular people on the planet, Kamala Harris, how can she still be in a role that she is in right now? I mean, talk about fucking psychopath.
She couldn't even get past the first round of the presidential race, could she? She was so unpopular.
Or Tulsi Gabbard. Look, Tulsi Gabbard did a number on her, and Tulsi should really be the president, in my opinion. Yes. I mean, if she was put up against Trump, she would have smashed him.
I know. I like Tulsi Gabbard. The thing was, they rigged that because after the presidential debates that she was involved with, Google then removed her from the search engines. People were so impressed with her, that destruction of Kamala Harris, for instance. And then nobody could search anything about it. The whole thing's rigged. It's something very, very strange going on. But you're right. If you do question the official narrative, the establishment narrative, you're called a conspiracy theorist. Yeah. You can't question anything. But things are so strange. More and more people, thankfully, are questioning things. What the hell's going on? Because I definitely think orders are coming from somewhere. People seem to be following a script. I mean, Biden doesn't even know what day it is. And you've probably seen Boris Johnson's performance the other day where he was talking about
what the hell's he doing?
And, well, he's going increasingly. I heard an interesting interview with one of his ex-girlfriends recently, and she said, he's not the person I knew. Someone's got to him. He's acting in increasingly bizarre ways. Maybe this sort of, he was always known as supposedly a libertarian and against exactly the kind of things that are going on now. And maybe before you take office, you get taken into a room and you get told, yes, you can have this power, but this is what you got to do for it. And when you leave office, you'll go on these talking tours and you'll earn millions, like Tony Blair, for instance. That's how we pay you back. It's very, very corrupt, the whole system. So it's no surprise that people have lost all confidence in politicians.
Yeah, and I really liked what you said. I was watching your YouTube clips, and during one of your radio broadcasts, you were saying, look, they're not on your side. Stop I'm paraphrasing you here, of course, but you were talking about how these politicians and I believe you're talking about of either persuasion, and I believe it too, they're not on your side. They don't give a shit about you or I or our kids or our mortgages or our bands or my podcast or anything. They don't care. People have got to stop taking sides. They've got to see that we, the people, have the actual power. We are the movers and shakers, but too many of us are in fear. We're so scared.
Yes, I would say about 80-20. You've got 20% of the population that see through a lot of the bullshit and really know that something's wrong, but 80% seem to be hypnotized. It's almost like, if you go into an analogy I often use, when you go into a theatre to watch a magician or a hypnotist on stage, and he performs a spell on the audience, but 20% cannot be hypnotized, but the 80% are, and it's nothing to do with intelligence. I don't know what it's to do with, but there is a larger percent of the population that are just under a spell. It's like mass psychosis, and you can't. I have many friends and family that I try to talk to about stuff, and they stop being the conspiracy theorists. No, you got to trust the government, and if it's not on the mainstream media, if it's not on the BBC, the Guardian, the Daily Mail, they won't believe it, despite the evidence, how controlled those outlets are. So it's very hard to get through to people.
The BBC and the ABC in Australia, that's the same thing, should be defunded, in my opinion. I've just graduated uni about 2 years ago. I did studies into the ABC. Let me tell you, like the BBC, mate, they don't have a charter that means that they can be impartial. They basically can promote whatever editorial narrative they want, and the oversight committee, whatever it might be called in Britain, whatever it's called here in Australia, I can't even remember the bloody name of it here.
Ofcom in Britain, yeah.
But it doesn't have teeth. So what can it do? It can't, it's not like it can suspend the paper like when Rupert had to disappear News of the World for all of their fuckery. What do you do? And I especially saw that some of my fellow graduates at uni, smart people, but they've taken this leftist, I don't know what you'd call it. It's just this totalitarian. I won't call it leftist. It's a totalitarian.
Yeah,
narrative.
I don't think left or right has any meaning anymore, and it's really top and bottom or whatever. It's not to do with left and right, because you find a lot of in America, for instance, the Democrats and Republicans follow the same foreign policy. It doesn't matter which one is in. Over here, we have New Labour. Of course, Blair was the natural heir to Margaret Thatcher, carried on all the skullduggery abroad and all the privatisation. It doesn't really make any difference. It's a myth. It's the old divide and rule, and you have people, the blue team, the red team, you have people at each other's throats. But it's not. It's actually, they're all put in power, they're manipulated. And I'm sure many politicians, many of them, when they get into it for the right reasons, but they soon find they will not get anywhere unless they come on board and agree to a certain agenda. They'll be marginalised, ridiculed and cast out and not taken seriously. But if they don't, they do what they're told to do. It's like when Blair won, when New Labour under Blair first won, I think it's 97. Apparently who the first visitor at Downing Street was when he won power? Rupert Murdoch went in through the back door, probably to explain what his agenda is. Because Murdoch had got behind Blair leading up to that, and then obviously claimed credit. Yeah. Because they all follow the same agenda, basically.
He did that with Kevin Rudd here in 2007. Yeah, as soon as they get behind somebody, they're in. I don't know whether their power is as broad as what people like to think it is these days because of the the traditional media has just been splintered. It's where do you get your news from these days? 17, 18, 20, 100 different sources. Who knows?
Yeah.
But I think people still like to think, especially here in Australia, there's always Rupert bashing, but it's like, I don't think he gives a shit what we do in our day-to-day these days. Like he's 90, whatever he is, or 80, whatever he is at the moment. I don't know how much true power he has, but I do think the public broadcasters have a lot of power because they don't have to turn a profit. They don't they can broadcast whatever they want to whichever audience they want, and they can more or less turn into CNN. And I think that the BBC's become so outrageous. Even a lot of its biggest supporters here can't bear watching it anymore. It's so off the scale, the propaganda, the manipulation. People are very upset, and there is increasing calls to defund it. Just don't pay the license fee, don't support it. So, for instance, over here there were
massive demonstrations. You know, I went on a couple of them. It was probably biggest demonstrations I've ever seen. It's big, certainly as big as the anti-Iraq war ones that I went on many years ago. Filing past the BBC could be 1 million people, but it didn't happen according to the BBC. Yeah. There was no mention of it anywhere. And so it's really like the Orwellian 1984 memory hole. You know, you delete it, didn't happen, therefore ignore it and it will go away. And it's quite astonishing. And more people are, I think their viewing figures are going down. The problem is, of course, people invite it into their home because they want to see, say, David Attenborough wildlife documentaries or poetry programs, music programs. Yeah, so there's a lot of things that people like, they feel comforted by. There's a lot of decent programming, or there was. And of course, but part of the deal is that you've got to then swallow the propaganda. And there's a funny joke. What was it? People say, well, at least the North Koreans get their propaganda for free. We got to pay a license fee for it.
Yeah. I've got to ask then, I've spoken to plenty of musicians on both sides of the Atlantic over the years, but you're remarkably resistant to this propaganda. You're a free thinker. You're an individual. You've got a libertarian outlook. It's certainly, you've always struck me as that while you're listening to your music, as I have done through the years. Why do you seem to be I can't really name anybody else like you. Like, do you understand what I'm saying? Like, there's a lot of, even John Lennon from the Sex Pistols has recently come out and sounds more like a neocon. So,
yes.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying. But you seem to have retained your sense of humanity about your outlook. And I'm not saying John hasn't, but I'm simply saying we share a lot of opinions and we've just met, but I've been listening to your music for a many years too. So is it just because you've remained educated and informed, you think, when others have decided it's just too easy to believe the propaganda, as we've decided to call it, that's just out there, whatever it might be? Yeah,
I don't know. I can't speak for others, but I do read a lot all across the spectrum. You know, I haven't had a television for 25 years, so that probably helps. But I do get my news from multiple sources, left, right, in the centre, just to sort of compare and contrast, really, because obviously the news that's presented through the mainstream is the propaganda of the day. And so I then like to look behind the stories and also be prepared to change your mind. I think the problem is if we have very fixed positions and our egos get involved, we try to sort of defend positions even if the evidence doesn't back it up. And I don't know. I'm concerned about this increasing division that's being whipped up and the hatred, because it benefits certain people when you have a population that are at each other's throats and there are strings being pulled in the shadow. It's the classic old British imperial divide and rule, divide and conquer, well, which goes back way before that. But I think just being curious, open-minded, and I'm a believer in free speech, free expression. Free speech is not just for people that we agree with. It's for, I'm very alarmed at the increasing censorship across all the social media channels, people being kicked off. We have to fight for free speech, even for people that we disagree with. I think it's the lifeblood of a democracy, and we don't have a functioning media anymore. It's really propaganda channels, and they're trying to bring in these new laws under innocuous names like the online safety bills, which is essentially to shut down what they call fake news and misinformation. Well, we know where most of the fake news comes from is the official channels, and they've been caught out over recent decades because of the growth of alternative news, and so they want to stamp that out. They don't want to have any alternative opinions, so they bring in these laws, regulations. They used, very sort of innocuous terms, as I said, like online safety. Well, who could disagree with online safety? We all want everyone to be safe. But once you dig deeper into it, it's like a censorship bill. It's to shut down debate and to shut up alternative viewpoints. And anybody that disagrees with the establishment line, the official narrative, will then be viewed as a domestic terrorist. It's quite outrageous what's going on.
Nailed it. You just nailed it in that that bit there that you just said. Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's the same here. It's the Trojan horse thing. It's labeling things as being something like here. We've got something called safe schools. Well, it's bloody anything but. It's this alternative viewpoint of all of these psychotic ideas. Hey, I'm no prude. Let me tell you. I mean, I love music. I love getting out there, doing different things and the like. But as soon as you start teaching 10-year-olds how to jerk off, stop it, for God's sakes. This sort of shit needs to stop, and it needs to stop now. I mean, we've both got kids, so we've got massive skin in this game, and I just think, of course, they label it with all of these touchy-feely, boilerplate statements like safe schools and whatever else it might be, and it makes it very hard to challenge because the layperson, the person in the everyday, as soon as you go, I don't like safe schools, it's like, so you don't want safe schools. It's like, no, dig deeper than that. Do you understand the policy? Do you understand what this will mean? What sort of subjects are going to be introduced to the syllabus and the curriculum as part of this program? You've got to dig deeper on these things, people. I know. And unfortunately, a lot of people, they don't have the time. They will just read the newspaper they've always read, watch the news, and don't have the time or the inclination to dig deeper. But it's a very, very a crafty, manipulative use of language. And there's all these think tanks and foundations, and behavioural scientists, of course, are heavily involved. Nudge units. We've had over here the people that behind, I think it was SAGE, it was the advisory group for the government here. It had more behavioural scientists on it than virologists or epidemiologists. Yeah. It just shows you it's to manipulate. And the same thing goes, the democracy's been hijacked by these shadowy groups, these think tanks and foundations. The funding comes from somewhere. We're not quite sure where, of course, because it's very shadowy. And it's to manipulate us. It's an abuse of democracy. And so, people don't know what they're voting for half the time. They can't get the information unless they really, really spend time digging. You've long had your finger on the pulse, as I've mentioned, but let's just talk about your song titles for a moment. The Beaten Generation, Armageddon Days, Here We Are Again. We Can't Stop What's Coming, even Phantom Walls. Okay, I mean, these all speak. The Sweet Bird of Truth, there's another one. I mean, all of these songs talk about, in abstract ways, it might be said, but they talk about, in some ways, in my opinion, what we're talking about here. So as I say, you've been talking about and singing about some of this stuff for damn near, 40 years, if you can believe it, at this point?
Yes, 42 years now, yeah.
42 years. So it's you as I say, you've always had an eye on these sorts of things, and it's so refreshing to hear that you agree with someone like myself. Someone like me, as I say, we've just met, but I'm 43 years of age. I've certainly lived long enough to understand that we're being fucked with at the moment. There's a lot of manipulation going on. But have you always got a lot of feedback about your lyrics and even about your song titles, about what that might be hinting at?
Well, more and more as time's gone on. But I remember when Mind Bomb came out, I took a terrible hammering by the press in the UK, not abroad, actually. It got very well received, but I've gone mad, I'm loony, conspiracy theorist. And then a few decades after that, people saying, oh, you're a prophet, or that. How did you know? But of course, I'm not a prophet and I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I just read, go out into the margins and look around. And of course, as I've had a lot of abuse on social media recently, last year, when I was just questioning what was going on here. Conspiracy theorist, loony, but I feel I'm right. I feel there's something really dark and sinister right from the outlet. As soon as the thing happened, nothing made sense to me. I was very well aware we're being heavily manipulated. Nothing really made sense. And so it's a case of intuition and instinct. And unfortunately, the way that particularly Western society, it's almost like trying to cut us off from our instinct. The culture has become increasingly infantilized. Yeah. And we're almost manipulated not to trust our instincts. But I think people have got to trust their intuition or instinct. It's what makes us human. Mm-hmm. And that's something, the internal alarm bells have been ringing over this situation for a long time. But as I said, you're up against a majority that are quite sleepwalking and don't really, and believing too much what they're being told. But yes, so it's, if you choose to swim against the tide, or you're going to take a certain amount of abuse, and a lot of people do take abuse. But they're only doing it to help other people. There's a lot of people being kicked off social media that are just trying to raise an alarm because their intuition is telling them something's wrong. I've got to do something to raise the alarm, and then they get abused for doing that. But unfortunately, I think, or fortunately, there are a lot of people that are still speaking out. Obviously yourself, many people all over social media, radio stations, artists, musicians, ordinary people in the streets. There's a sizable amount of people that are trying to ring the alarm bells to say, look, something is amiss here.
So with regards to social media, do you get maybe people feel like as though you're unobtainable, meaning that you're in the public spotlight, and if they send you a message, you won't read it. But I know for me, all I get is very nice, very positive comments all over the world, by the way, from Europe, from Britain, Ireland, from the United States, people saying, yeah, I agree with you. I don't know what the hell's going on here. But are you receiving those private messages from people, even if you're getting bashed by people on social media in the public sense, in the comments section? Are you getting the private messages of support by people who just, they're scared of actually showing and demonstrating public support when you're getting such negative feedback in the comment section?
Well, the truth is I don't go on Facebook myself. I've got some people that work with me, work for me, that actually do a lot of that posting. So occasionally I'll dip in and out, because otherwise I found it a bit, there's a lot of positive stuff, and there's a certain amount of, not so much negative, but some negative. But I found that it gets so time consuming to do, there's just too many messages a lot of the time. So we post stuff out, we keep it. One thing I did notice with Twitter was that there was a bit of shadow banning, I think, going on. And because I used to post, years ago, a lot of political stuff, and I realised the political stuff wouldn't get very far. I don't think it's been seen by many people. And I remember at the time, a couple of years ago, thinking, this is very strange. And I mentioned it to someone. They said, I didn't think anything of it. And then the story broke that they do shadow ban accounts that say things that are too political. So although you think you're posting stuff up, the algorithms ensure that it's not seen by many people.
Correct. Yeah.
So the social media is part of the problem. I mean, it brings great potential and great possibilities to communicate with others, but it's also very tightly controlled. Facebook, Google, Twitter, they are as much a part of the problem as more a part of the problem than the solution, really. Yeah,
agreed. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's. I used to think it was a yin and yang scenario there. I don't think that at all these days. I don't know how you correct it. I don't think we can. But it's this whole idea that you can say things behind a burner account or an anonymous profile, and you see that Twitter is just the alpha and the omega for that, isn't it? I mean, the vast majority of people on there, certainly anecdotally, just from my own observations, are using burner accounts or anonymous profiles, and they're posting the most toxic, awful shit that they would never, here's the key point, they would never say it to the person's face.
No.
Not without a mob behind them anyway.
No, it's absolutely right. It's a lot of bots, a lot of trolls, but also there's, I'm sure you got the same in Australia, but here there's in the UK, a division of the army, I believe it's called the 77th Brigade, is set up. It's a cyber battalion that is, their purpose is to go onto social media and shout down and abuse any posters that are posting anything that again goes against the official line. And it's called being ratioed. So, for instance, the bots will, if somebody posts something, being ratioed. So they ensure that you get probably 100 to 1 negative to positive comments. So it's a swarm of bots that then abuse, and then it's these, behavioural science experiments where they've found, I think it was the Ash experiments, wasn't it? Where they would find that an individual is less likely, if he's surrounded by people that hold one point of view, he's less likely to put his hand up to express his point of view.
Yeah.
Not everybody falls into that, and but generally it's a way of manipulating behaviour. And so by doing that online, humiliating a certain viewpoint, many people will be too frightened to then put their hand up and back up that viewpoint. It's very disturbing the way that, as I said earlier, democracy has been totally undermined. Yeah. And many people aren't aware that social media is one of the battlegrounds now.
Indeed. And look, with all what we've spoken about, it can cause people to dive into episodes of depression and just a general malaise, isn't it? But the antidote to that a lot of the time is music. And a lot of that comes down to some of the music that you're doing too. So I'm one of those young fellas through the 80s. I'm 43, as I said, so I watched your videos on late night TV here through the 80s and 90s. And I always thought you were a bit of a late night treat. I used to call bands like and Love and Rockets, this sort of thing, Pill. You'd see this stuff on and would just like, wow, look at this. It feels like you're watching something which is very different from a lot of the Oz rock, which is going on around me at the time, AC/DC or what have you. But look, it's a treat to hear how you've reinterpreted so many of those great tunes, those song titles that I've already mentioned, at this Albert Hall gig. But here's the thing. I feel like this is less about you reaching for a new audience to sort of share your music in a different way. Rather, I feel like you're bringing people like me, fans, people for whom your music is a special part of their lives, even closer by bringing things full circle in a more intimate setting. Would you agree with that?
I would. Yes, I would hope so. And I think in a way, this album is a sort of summing up of the career to date, and then allowing me to then move on to the next phase. But I wanted to, with this project, to because some of the versions they're quite different to the original versions. So I wanted to make it as fresh as possible with the lineup that I put together, which was not cold, but was pulled from different eras of the band's past, and filtering through this lineup, I think it gave the songs a real freshness, a real sort of dynamic sound, and it really brought them up to date. Because the original versions, they're not going anywhere; they're on the record. But for my own satisfaction, I didn't want to just recreate what I did in the past. And so the songs, I think, sound even stronger with this new lineup and this new band. And I'm hoping to sort of solidify and the audience that was there, and then bring in hopefully fresh generation of listeners as well, to then carry forward onto the next project.
Okay, gotcha. So that kind of answers why you rekindled the fire, because I was aware that you hadn't been performing live for, it's well over a decade, isn't it?
It was about 16 years or something. Yeah.
Wow, yeah. So in someone in your position, it's not necessarily a day job, is it? I mean, you've got your finger in multiple pies. So what were you doing through that period?
Well, I was doing a lot of soundtrack work, which I've always loved, film soundtrack. Doing a fair amount of traveling, formed a little book publishing company.
Yes.
Doing many other things as well, but just out of the public eye because, various reasons, really. But then there was a documentary made about me called The Inertial Variations.
Yes, great documentary, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was my ex-partner, Johanna St. Michaels, who's a Swedish documentarian. Mm-hmm. But it was in that documentary that I wrote a new song, which was We Can't Stop What's Coming, written for my brother, died during the making of that documentary.
Oh, sorry to hear.
And so I wrote that song and performed that song live in my studio, and it was broadcast live and filmed. And that was the first new song I'd written in years, and first time I'd sung in 15 or 16 years. But I really enjoyed the process. I really enjoyed singing again, and I forgot how much I missed it. And it was shortly after that my agent sat with me, we had lunch, and he said, look, do you fancy playing live again? And I'd always turned it down, but because of this recent experience of singing again, I decided to do it. And then one thing led to another. We put sales, and the shows sold out in minutes. And I didn't expect that. I didn't know what to expect. And so the whole thing snowballed. And the tour ended up being probably my most enjoyable tour in a way, and one of the most successful. despite it being my first tour in 18 years. I didn't know if there was an audience still there. I just didn't know, because I'm not somebody that hangs out in the music business, really. My life is quite away from the music industry. So I didn't know what to expect, but it was so enjoyable. And we recorded all of the UK shows, but I wanted to film the Albert Hall one because by my friend, the director Tim Pope, because he had filmed us when we played there previously. We did 3 nights in 1990. But what made it more intense this time, not only it was my first time in a London stage for 16 years, we were being filmed, we were being recorded, but my father died 2 or 3 days before the show.
Wow. Okay.
So it made it a very, very intense situation for me to be on the stage. My dad was looking forward to being at the show. Family and friends were there. So it was the right show to film. The whole tour was intense and enjoyable, but that particular night was very, very emotional. And luckily I had such a good band around me. We were very well rehearsed. So I knew, and I did announce at the start of the show what had happened, because I felt, you know what, I needed to get the audience. It's not that they wasn't on side, but I wanted them to know what I was going through, because I thought if I make mistakes or whatever, they'll understand. But luckily, the band were very good, and we did a good show. So it was a very intense project. And then the recorded version would have come out in early 2020, but obviously we went on a dystopian detour. But that during lockdown, gave us more time to work on it, to mix, to edit the film. And then we did a beautiful coffee table book, because we had a lot of material. So it's ended up being a much bigger project than it may have done, because I tried to let's try to create something positive from this lockdown situation. And, so hopefully that's what we've done.
Yeah, I think you have done that, and I've got to say, I was listening to it. I've listened to it a few times now, and so for people listening, the album is called The Comeback Special, and it's recorded live at the Albert Hall. It's an Albert Hall gig, so it is special on a number of fronts. Especially so, I've lost my father too, but with your father no longer being with us and being so close to that performance there, but I could hear the tension, because I'm a musician too. I could hear it. It felt like, you know what, I was trying to think, I like to come up with these statements, if you like, and relate them to the music that a great artist like yourself has produced. And now, what it reminded me of, it's like swimming in a very calm tropical ocean. So from the surface, everything looks really calm, but underneath it are some of those violent animals known to mankind. Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment that your music is a violent animal, but it's like that tension is like, if you go up to Cairns or what have you and you swim in the ocean, there's sharks and crocodiles there, but it looks beautiful. It's some of the most beautiful ocean you'll ever see anywhere. But it's got that tension to it. Your music reminds me of that.
Oh, that's a nice analogy. I do. There was a lot of, I think the band that I put together, the musicianship, they're capable of that. And the way that we stripped the arrangements down, so they were quite taut and tightly sprung underneath. So there's a lot of melodies. Tonally, it's nice and rich, I hope. But there is also a tension. Not just at any moment, it feels like it could explode, and occasionally it does explode. But I'm glad that comes across.
Yeah, it reminded me a lot of the recent Swans material, Michael Girard.
Yes,
it had that same vibe going on.
Yeah.
And that's honestly, I can't give you a bigger compliment than that, because I love Swans and what you're doing.
Yeah, I like Mike. I've not seen him for years, but he's a nice guy.
Yeah, he is. He's one. I've got to say though, he's one of the few people I was warned prior to an interview to have. I think the language was "know your shit" or "don't bother." I thought I didn't mind that, because apparently he'd bitten a few people's heads off before me. But him and the only other one beside him was Al Di Meola, the guitar great, because he'd had a run-in with a journalist only recently, but it was for very different reasons. A bit like that situation with Adele recently, where the bloody Channel 7 Australian Sunrise journalist.
Oh, yes, I heard about that.
I mean, why would you turn up to an interview without listening to the artist's work? Really?
I know. He didn't get the email, did he? Apparently is what he said.
Oh, he's a liar, because he would have got the album in advance, and he would have got the talking points, but they would have been all about her weight loss and all that bullshit. you know.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I haven't listened to the interview because I don't think it'll. He didn't even get the interview, did he? But I'd love to see what the talking points that his producers gave to him, because they'd just be garbage.
Yeah.
They'd just be, none of them would be about music. Yeah. It's no, I'm glad you feel that way about your music. And it was, but I'm just going to backtrack a little bit. What you were doing in your time off, Tales from the Two Puddings. I'm going to read that book, by the way. I'm going to get it soon. But I think you've only got, am I right in saying you've only got a few books released on is it 51st State Publishing? Is that the name of your publishing house?
51st State Press. Yeah, we've got more lined up, but because of the tour happening and everything, I've not been able to do that. But Tales from the Two Puddings was my late father's book. Memoirs, a pub that my parents had in East London in the 1960s and 70s, which was one of the most famous music houses in East London. And my dad always wanted to write. He was a wonderful storyteller. And he wrote a lot of stories down. But for his 80th birthday, I decided to publish it. And so I edited it, published it, and it went very, very well. I got him on national radio. We did big interviews in London magazines. I did a lovely event at an institute that was sold out, and the book sold very, very well. Got great reviews. So it was the best birthday present I could have given him, and it's still ticking away, still selling well. And there's talk of turning it into a. Oh, hang on one second.
You're right.
Yeah. Possibly turn it into a television show at some point. And he's written a prequel that I sadly didn't get to publish before he died, so I'm still editing that. And there's other books that we've got lined up as well. But I'm excited about them.
Real stories from real people talking about things that have happened, especially a pub in London in that era. Gosh. Yeah,
you'll like it. It's a lot of humour in it, and there's a lot of interesting characters, because it was my uncle, my dad's younger brother, was a big music promoter in London in the 60s. He promoted people like The Who, The Kinks, John Lee Hooker, Small Faces. And so they played in the pub. So it was a lot of well-known people, footballers, World Cup winners were drinking there, and gangsters. Nice. It was a very interesting place to grow up in as a little boy.
I bet. Does that sort of lean into your love for? Am I right in saying this? Because I was watching the documentary, P5, a rover. Is that where some of that?
Yes.
Okay, got it. Okay, got it. Yeah,
I've got a couple of them, and I love. I guess it's the era you grow up in as a little boy, but I love the old rovers. They were prime ministerial and government cars as well. Yep. And I've had a couple. I've had the saloon version. And I've also now got the coupe version, but they're a bit temperamental. They're beautiful cars, V8, lovely big leather armchairs and wood. But of course, they're getting old now. Mine was nearly 50 years old, so they get harder and harder to maintain, and they're a bit prone to rust. So you have to make sure you keep them out of the bad weather. But they're beautiful cars, understated. They're probably a notch above a Jaguar, but a notch below a Bentley, and they're very understated. They're not flash. That's what I like about them.
Beautiful cars. They were here in Australia, I believe, as well. And I think they had a Chrysler engine in them in Australia. Is your engine a Chrysler? Do you know, source?
Buick. No, it was Buick. So it was Buick. A P5B. Yeah. The B stood for Buick, and Rover bought the Buick engine. It was a small 3.5-litre V8, which Buick developed but didn't have a use for, and then Rover bought it and brought all the tooling over. So that's what it was. Yeah, Buick V8.
I'm so glad you're an aficionado of cars. I've got a Jeep Hemi, an SRT. I know people laugh at those cars these days, but I think they're going to be pulled from the Australian market soon. So
really,
you can't really buy V8s in Australia anymore unless you buy an Audi or a Merc or a BMW. They're pretty much out of, ever since Holden, which is the same as Vauxhall. Holden and Ford stopped doing V8s, which is about 5 years ago or so now. I mean, there's no, as you know, the world's going toward hybrid drivetrains or full electric drivetrains. There just isn't. So I think cars like that P5 are only going to increase in value.
Yeah, but they're going to start phasing out petrol, aren't they? Over in the UK, they say by 2025, there's going to be no petrol cars made anymore. Whether they can stick to that, I don't, God knows. But then I can imagine it being rationed, and you'll only be able to take it out once in a while. But it's a lovely car. It's an old, what can I say? A guilty pleasure.
Yeah. You're a class act, man, I've got to say. So, look, I'll wrap things up there. And look, I really appreciate this conversation, that, you know, your frankness and your ability to stand within truth and talk about these things. So my final point would be, I've mentioned I host a podcast. Are you cool with me releasing what we've spoken about on the podcast?
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it, mate. Yeah. I think it's important to hear the things that you said from you, because it makes people feel more empowered then. Yes, yeah, and I think so. No, also you end up being, you know, through social media, you get misquoted or misunderstood. But it's just coming from a point of view of searching for the truth. You know, humans, you know, grasp and gasp for the truth as they do oxygen and light. You know, and there's that sense that something fundamentally has gone wrong, and we're not allowed to question it without being called a conspiracy theorist. It's to shut up debate. It's to put a tape around an area and say you're not allowed to ask questions. And it's behavioural science, and it's working the way that it's forcing so many people to, just to shut up or turn against themselves or attack people with an alternative viewpoint. And like I've said earlier, I'm favour of free speech and free expression and exchange of ideas. You know, sometimes we're right, sometimes we're wrong, but that's how we grow and we develop. And by shutting that down, surely, and censoring and attacking anyone with an alternative viewpoint, that should make the alarm bells ring for anybody. Agreed. And Matt, so you have you are a gentleman and a scholar. I want to thank you for as I say, sharing what you shared, and just for making the music that you've made. It is important because, as I say, we lead long lives. And they're full of all sorts of tragedy and dilemma and calamity and challenges and all the rest of it. And it's because of the music that you've written in many instances, a lot of instances, as a matter of fact. Certainly you've seen the faces staring back at you at the Albert Hall gig, as you have done through gigs all across your career. Yeah. It's very important what you do, and it is very meaningful for people to listen to the music that you've created. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Well, you have a lovely night tonight. Will do. What are you up to? Going out for a few beers? No, the kids, mate. I've got young and so 6 and an 8 year old. So we are just in prime child rearing phase at the moment. So I might be able to squeeze in a bedtime story. Yeah, exactly. Bedtime story before I pass out. I mean, not from being drunk or anything like that, but just by being tired. Yeah. You know. So, but that's what's in store. So yeah, but it's been a pleasure, Matt. I look forward to this chat. I'm so glad that it's taken place. So thank you again, mate. Lovely to talk to you. You take care. Thanks very much again. Cheers. Yeah, take care. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Catch ya. Well, there it is. What do you think? Let me clarify something. Up top, I compared Matt to Michael Girard from Swans, and I did that because they're both originators in their genre, and they've been very, very influential. That's what I meant by the comparison. Not that the conversations themselves were all that similar, it must be said, although I would love to have a conversation like the one you just heard with Matt, with Michael. I imagine that he'd have more left-wing opinions, but I don't mind that. If we can talk about things in a manner where we are trying to get to the bottom of things, I think that's wonderful. I truly do. But only people with patience and intellect seem to be able to do that, something that is missing from most political discourse these days. Thank you, mainstream media and Twitter, for creating the spin cycle of shitty views, opinion. They're not even views and opinions, are they? They're editorial. They're not news. Mainstream media is no longer news. It's all bullshit. The best thing that you can do, people, is tune out. Now, I'm saying that as a journalist. I am a trained journalist. I'm looking at my bachelor's degree on my wall here, Bachelor of Journalism, it says, and I've had scant opportunity to use it, it must be said, because I simply will not go into a career knowing I could potentially be peddling bullshit. Very sad state of affairs in media in 2021. It's been like that for about 5 or 6 years, I think, but it's just never been worse never been as bad as what it is right now. Get your news from independent media sources and sources that are trying to get to the bottom of things, like what I try to do on my show whenever we have conversations like that. There you go. Maybe if I could be so bold and brazen as to say, maybe I'm a source of news for you. There you go. Through the conversations I have. That's what I mean. So my name's Andrew Mackay-Smith, and I'm the host of the Scars and Guitars podcast series. I appreciate that you have tuned in, because it means that you enjoy what it is that I'm doing here. It must mean that. Otherwise, you wouldn't still be sticking around listening to this lengthy outro. So if you're interested, go over to scarsandguitars.com, where you'll find many more conversations, not like that one, I must say, but they're conversations with musicians, and we talk about music, sometimes politics, sometimes current affairs, all sorts of topics go into the mix when a new episode is posted from Scars and Guitars, the podcast series. I'm the only one who does this, so I have no idea why I'm referring to myself as Scars and Guitars. It's a bit weird, isn't it, actually? But whatever. I appreciate that you've tuned in, and whatever it is that you're up to, stay safe. And until next time, it is a very goodbye for now.